Welcome everybody, Mike Manna here, bringing to you a video essay on how to create a video essay. Like the video title says, we are looking at how to transform an academic text into a creative video essay. By academic text, I mean a peer-reviewed article or a chapter of a book or whatever your little heart desires. This video has 3 goals. First, we compare and contrast 2 genres of video, what we might call the standard lecture video, and then what we might call a creative video essay. Second, I'm going to provide 3 guiding principles to getting very complex material across to a general audience. And finally, I'm going to walk you through one of my previous video essays. Okay, let's talk video genres. Because before we talk about the creative video essay, we gotta understand how a regular lecture video is generally structured. Now, a lot of times, a standard video lecture is based off the structure of an in-person classroom lecture. Now, usually an in-person lecture takes a text written in a very specialized language and then translates that text into a spoken version while staying within the parameters of that very same specialized language, maybe reworded for a bit of simplicity. Now, we expect people to get to class having done some homework, and as the educators, we clarify stuff. This is exactly not what we are doing with creative video essays. We are not summarizing and we are not reviewing material. Now, we'll come back to this in a bit, but next let's think about what constitutes a video essay. I would say that a creative video essay is far more related to a creative written essay. For example, it has an introduction with a thesis, it has a couple body paragraphs, and then it has some closing thoughts. And importantly, everything you need to know is in that essay. On the other hand, with a classroom lecture, a lot of times we pick up from where our last lecture left off. So we presume there is knowledge to be built upon. A creative video essay does not assume any homework has been done in preparation for a text. So guiding principle number 1 for creating a video essay, assume the audience has done no homework for you. In other words, assume they know absolutely nothing about the material you're going to present. I know that might sound a little weird, but stick with me. The goal is to produce videos that students watch before they read the original text. This primes students to read a certain way, and the video essay also kind of points them toward places you as the educator find valuable. Now, if we think of ourselves as video essayists, the idea of an essay kind of suggests this is a more creative endeavor rather than formal, because typically we write essays for a general audience. However, let's not mistake creativity with simplification. What I try to do is capture the depth of an academic text and go even deeper where the text itself cannot, because I have an advantage. I can have pictures on the screen, animations, graphics, texts, quotes, sound effects, all that good stuff. So in that sense, I am absolutely against the idea that translating academic texts into videos means that something will automatically be lost in translation. And this brings us to our first set of potential difficulties. How do I make specialized knowledge accessible without using the specialized language of my field? Now, this is where a creative mindset is required. If you walk in with the idea that there is no way to explain X without using the word Y, then you probably won't get very far. I'm here to tell you that it is possible. I do it in every single video. But it took a really long time to figure out what language for me to change and what language to focus on, and then narrow down what actually works. Now today, I'm just gonna tell you how I do it, and I'm gonna tell you by constantly referring to a central metaphor that we'll be using throughout this whole video. I think of my video essays not as translation, but as musical transposition, or the idea of changing the key of a song. So we'll be using that as our central metaphor. This is what I mean. Have you ever heard someone in a karaoke bar trying to sing something that is just way too high in pitch for them? They simply cannot reach those notes. They can't reach those musical patterns. Now, some karaoke bars have the same song in 2 different musical keys. Generally 1 key for men and 1 key for women. The assumption being in lower and higher pitched voices. All the musical patterns are the same, but adjusted for equal but differing capabilities for lower or higher pitched voices. It's the same song, but in a different musical key. Now, the best singers in the world know exactly what musical keys they specialize in and what musical keys to stay a million miles away from. We can think of our discipline-specific specialized language as the musical key we are trained to sing in. This is where we are trained to communicate our ideas. As an educator or academic that uses a specialized language, could you take your own work and explain it to, for example, PhDs from an entirely different field who use an entirely different specialized language? Now keep in mind, they all have PhDs, right? So they're all pretty smart, but they specialize in singing in a totally different key than you do. This is what I mean by transposing material for equal but differing capabilities. We don't need to simplify, we need to transpose. For video essays, we must imagine our audience is just as smart as us, because if we don't, we are off to a very bad start. Transposition then is where we must focus all of our creative energy. Luckily, we already have the major language skills. You already know your specialized language, but you also already know how to speak in non-specialized language. The new skill then is figuring out how to transpose from A to B. Now, generally, we might think as the teacher, you are trying to bring students over to you, to your specialized language. But staying true to the musical metaphor, a music teacher with a low-pitched voice would never try to force a student with a high-pitched voice to sing using only low notes, or force them to sing in a range that they can't reach. The music teacher must transpose all their musical knowledge into the student's abilities and trains the student to use their voice. This means that as the music teacher, I have to teach myself to sing with them, not the other way around. So in this sense, we have to train ourselves to relearn our specialized language in a different musical key. This is why I say that I transpose academic material into a different key. I don't translate material in a downward direction, or dumb things down, or go into the video assuming something is going to be lost in translation. I've learned over the last few years that my audience likes to sing in a certain key. I taught myself to sing with them as opposed to trying to force them to sing with me. Now let's get into some practical advice for transposing texts. The most common question I get is, what text should I start with? The first question you gotta ask yourself is, who is my audience? For now, let's assume that we're making a video for a specific class that we're teaching. As a general rule, I always recommend that you start making videos with texts you are very comfortable with. The ones that are deeply interesting to you and that you could talk about all day, and then script out your video. All my videos are 100% scripted, including this video. Then after you select material or a text, there is the question of, how much should I cover? How many examples? How long should the video be? Now the last question is easy. The video should be as long as it needs to be, but the shorter, the better. I usually make videos that are about 10 to 20 minutes long. Then there's the next questions. What do I cover and how much? Let's pretend we're starting with a text that we love, one of your go-to favorite articles. To begin, limit yourself to one article or one chapter or one text, just one. And from that one text, focus on one keyword, just one. But realistically, a lot of times I need to cover 2 keywords. But this is my absolute limit, 2. So here is my second guiding principle. One text, one keyword per video. Maybe 2. The key is to go as deep as you can into that one keyword. We absolutely do not want to make a video overview. Overviews tend to summarize, while video essays are going for depth and creativity. A lot of times we're reading stuff that has about 5 or 6 important pieces of jargon or keywords. And the hardest part is picking out the main 1 or 2. Usually there's that one central keyword that's very obvious, but then there's all those other secondary keywords that we kind of need to filter through. Here I want to get into a specific example. Let's say there's about 5 keywords in the text that I chose. To increase the odds of students really learning all those keywords, I want to do the heavy lifting for the students. I want my students to walk away from my videos with at least one main keyword in their back pocket. Sometimes we can get away with 2 keywords in their back pocket before they even pick up the original text. Because if our students or audience feels like they own at least 1 or 2 keywords, then all the side keywords kind of just fall into place, mainly because students don't have to learn all the keywords at the same time and for the first time. That gives the audience more mental space for a far deeper comprehension overall. So next I'm going to break down one of my video essays. I wanted to cover a very famous concept from the book Black Feminist Thought by Patricia Hill Collins. That concept or keyword is called controlling images, which is kind of related to the idea of a racial stereotype. But in order to get that concept across, I needed to talk about another keyword, the term objectification. Here's the thing. In the chapter, the word objectification is not presented as a keyword at all. It's just a word that is used really often. So here I had to pull on my expertise as the educator and know that students always have trouble with the word objectification. There are many ways to talk about it. They've probably heard it in other classes, maybe in psychology, maybe in economics, or in anthropology. Objectification is a word that brings with it a lot of conceptual clutter, and I want to clear away that clutter to make more mental space. Another way to say this is objectification is a heavy word, and I need to lighten the load. As the educator, I want to do the heavy lifting for my students. So those are my 2 selections. The main keyword, controlling images, and the term objectification, which I elevated to the status of keyword because I know it's used often. Remember, 2 keywords at the maximum. So while you watch this video, remember, I am always thinking of how to transpose material into language most people know. Most people know what a racial stereotype is. So let's go back to our central musical metaphor, or the idea that the audience likes to sing in a particular key. Let's pretend conversations about racial stereotypes is one musical key, and the specialist conversation about controlling images is another musical key. I'm going to try to transpose the song called Controlling Images into the musical key that my audience likes to sing in. In other words, I know my audience feels comfortable using the conversational language about stereotypes, so I'm gonna meet my audience on their home turf, constantly referencing how this relates to racial stereotypes. So even if the audience has no idea what controlling images are or what objectification is, the audience might feel like they know something about these 2 keywords that really isn't that new. We are making new material feel familiar. Okay, so next let's watch the video on controlling images, and underneath I'm going to be giving you annotations describing exactly what I'm doing. Let's watch. Welcome back, word nerds. Mike here with the Social Life of Language, making complex theory simple but never simplified. If you think that sounds cool, hit that subscribe button now. Today we'll be talking about controlling images, a concept found in Patricia Hill Collins' book, Black Feminist Thought. Specifically, we're going to be covering chapter 4 titled Mammies, Matriarchs, and Other Controlling Images. So in a way, we're kind of talking about racial stereotypes, but reframing them and approaching them through Collins' notion of controlling images. So we might see this picture of a sleepy, lazy Mexican, and as a Mexican American, I might be offended. I might laugh. I might not think about it too hard at all. Or I might devote my life to making damn sure nobody thinks that I behave this way. Because seriously, I would never sleep on a cactus. Collins suggests that images like these have powerful effects on the world. They help shape and organize society. They reflect, they create, they reinforce power relations and racial hierarchy. So how does that happen? Let's find out. So let's start with a quote. Controlling images are designed to make racism, sexism, poverty, and other forms of social injustice appear to be natural, normal, and inevitable parts of everyday life. Part of Collins' Black feminist perspective is about identifying how controlling images continue to be used to govern aspects of Black women's lives. So granted, this puts me in a little bit of an awkward position here since I identify as neither Black nor woman. With that said, I will continue with caution and try my best not to F this up by accidentally engaging in the same objectifying practices that are at the heart of controlling images. But that's actually a good place to start. Let's talk about objectifying practices, or objectification, because that is a big ass word that we need to think about before we move forward. In very simple terms, objectification is the process of defining someone or some group. When we define someone or some group, in that process, they become an object of study. And by object of study, I mean that it becomes a thing that someone points out and decides it is worth talking about or to study. So this could range from anything from a sociological study with statistics to people or experts on Fox News totally just running their mouth. Now, often actors that occupy the most powerful positions in society are the ones that get to choose what is worth studying, and they also get to define those objects of study. They have the power to draw in wide audiences, or sometimes they're smaller but more powerful audiences. And as Collins has noted, Black women have many times been chosen as objects of study or objects of interest to a variety of powerful actors and institutions, from academics to news media organizations. And historically, Black women have been completely excluded from the process of defining themselves. This exclusion is an effect of unequal power relations. In this sense, the power to define or the power to objectify often means the power to dominate. Or as Collins says, domination always involves attempts to objectify the subordinate group. So controlling images are stereotypical objectifications. So that brings us to another question. What is the difference between thinking about stereotypes and thinking about controlling images? Well, when we think about stereotypes as having power and acting upon the world, it makes us think a little bit different. Collins is inviting us not just to identify stereotypes, but also to think about how certain stereotypes are capable of organizing people's perception, are capable of shaping expectations, and also having real material consequences. For example, the lazy Mexican stereotype is a controlling image that embeds a mode of perception that ideologically positions Mexicans and Mexican Americans as lazy. And if we think of Mexicans as lazy, then perhaps all their children are lazy. Perhaps all immigrants are lazy. And then what happens if a teacher brings that belief into the classroom? That worldview, that way of thinking about Mexicans did not emerge from Mexicans and Mexican Americans themselves, but emerged from a white supremacist worldview that defined Mexicans as lazy. Controlling images don't necessarily determine reality, but they help shape reality. Another difference from stereotypes might be that stereotypes don't ever really seem to change, while controlling images are dynamic and changing, meaning that controlling images become what they need to be to reproduce white supremacy, or misogyny, or poverty, or any mode of domination. So maybe we don't think about the lazy Mexican sleeping on a cactus, but we do have a controlling image that tells us Latinx children are lazy, or less capable, or deficient. Or another controlling image might be the lazy immigrant mother, who comes to the United States just to have children and live off of welfare. So you see, controlling images become what they need to be to reproduce social relations. Another difference might be that when we think of stereotypes, we think of them one at a time. But when Collins talks about controlling images, they never work alone, but as constellations of images, or groups of images that work together, which makes them all the more pervasive because of their expansive reach. And a lot of times their power is magnified by how they build off each other, or reinforce one another. So while we tend to think of stereotypes as being about one type of person, controlling images work more like a cast of characters in a play. When you got one controlling image, you also got a bunch more working in the background. So let's concentrate on one controlling image from this chapter and then add a cast of characters around that controlling image. In other words, let's lay out a constellation of controlling images. Let's think about the welfare queen, which is a controlling image that has remained kind of consistent over many decades. Now, obviously the word queen entails a gender dimension, but there is also a class and moral dimension in there, as in it implies a lavish but lazy lifestyle, paid for by the hardworking taxpayer. So notice here, the hardworking taxpayer is itself a controlling image, or an idealization of a working middle-class white man. Now, the welfare queen, of course, has children, which implies a failed motherhood, which implies yet another controlling image. We can call this the good mother. This idea of a pure motherhood emerges from a white supremacist, misogynist ideology, or what Collins refers to as the cult of true womanhood, where true women possessed four cardinal virtues: piety, purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. So of course, this good white mother is completely submissive to her husband, in opposition to the welfare queen, who is probably single because she allegedly can't keep her husband. So notice this neat little cast of characters, almost like a little imagined society. Now, the good white mother is itself a controlling image, in that it defines what constitutes a good mother. And if you don't fall within those boundaries, it would likely have stigmatizing and oppressive effects. But notice how the good mother is more in the realm of a potentially positive stereotype, even though the effects are likely going to be oppressive. But when it comes to controlling images of Black women, Collins suggests that these controlling images are almost always uniformly negative. Let's add a couple more to our cast of characters. The controlling image of the welfare queen Okay, so in the video, I stuck to controlling images and objectification as my main keywords. But to help me in the transposition process, I'm constantly referring to racial stereotypes. That is the common language that we share, so that's where I'm going to go. I'm not meeting my audience halfway. I'm going all the way to them. That is my third pedagogical principle. Teach on your audience's home turf. As we've been talking about, we are transposing material into the audience's non-disciplinary, non-specialist language, where they feel most at home, their home turf. There are a couple ways to make sure you actually get there. And this goes back to the first guiding principle. Don't assume the audience has done any homework, but I suggest that we go even further than that. We should also add, don't assume the audience has had classes with you, and also don't assume you'll have another class to reteach the same material. In other words, just put it in your head that you have one chance to teach. It almost forces you to drop any extra specialized language that could potentially throw your audience off, or potentially clutter up the mental space you're trying to make for your students. Now, there are major benefits to this approach. It means that you can use these same videos in future classes, and you can just drop it in at any point in the semester, because the video essays themselves are not dependent on any specialized language or any previous knowledge. By the way, pro tip here, don't say phrases like, last week we read this, or good luck on your exam this Friday, or maybe don't have a Christmas tree in your background, because what if you assign this video in the springtime. Because if we're thinking long-term about these videos, we're kind of making a personal library of video essays. Stuff you can use and reuse many times. Which means that maybe in future classes, you'll spend less time making PowerPoints or writing out complete lectures. Okay, let's start summarizing the main strengths of creative video essays. First, video essays are different from video lectures because they work autonomously, without need for lectures before or after. That means you can use your videos over and over again across many semesters. You could even share videos with your colleagues or with your department. So the fact that video essays work without being attached to any specific class is an absolute strength. Also, I think the craziest part of transposing material is that it makes most academic texts accessible to yes, other PhDs, and yes, graduate students, and yes, undergraduates, but it also makes academic texts accessible to high school students. Because here's the thing, most high school students use the same non-discipline specific language as PhDs. Almost everyone knows how to sing in the musical key named non-specialist language. And the last strength that I'll mention here is the push to be creative in your teaching. Make no mistake, it takes a massive degree of creativity to transpose material. But remember, creativity has the potential to bring joy to teaching and learning. And let me ask you a very serious question. Does making PowerPoint presentations or slideshows bring you joy? Do they bring joy to your students? Personally, that is a very important part of my pedagogical approach. So video essays are difficult to make, but they're not too difficult to make, especially if you follow my 3 guiding principles. 1, your audience has not done any homework for you. 2, just focus on 1 or 2 keywords. Just 1 or 2. Remember, we are not translating downward or simplifying, we are transposing. Our goal is creativity and depth. And guiding principle number 3, meet your audience on their home turf. This means teach yourself to sing with them, as opposed to forcing them to sing with you. And by the way, bonus points to you if you noticed that in this video essay, I followed the 3 guiding principles. I focused on 1 keyword, transposition, and I kept comparing video essays to classroom lectures. That was to make the new feel familiar. I also kept making comparisons to things most people know about. For example, contrasting video essays to video lectures. This all makes the new feel familiar. And finally, the entire metaphor about learning how to sing with your students was also me transposing my pedagogical approach into a metaphor that you hopefully felt more comfortable with. Because honestly, this video could have used tons of big pedagogical words with constant references to this or that methodology. In other words, this video was me trying to sing with you. Well, that's all for today, folks. Hopefully you now have a running start into creating your own video essays. You can visit me at maestromikemena.com. Once again, this is Mike with the Social Life of Language YouTube channel, and we're done.